Namaste. My name is Krishna Keshav Das, and I am presenting on an American perspective on Neo-Darwinian evolutionary theory as an obstacle to progress in biology and dynamic social development. I am the serving assistant to Dr. Bhaktimadhava Puri from the Princeton Bhaktivedanta Institute. Growing up in America's educational system, I'm very much aware of the unquestionable authority with which Neo-Darwinian evolution is taught to students. I've witnessed those skeptical of Darwin's theory receiving emotional backlash instead of rational discussion, even from esteemed scientists. Interestingly, Chinese paleontologist Jun Yuan Chen recognized, in China we can criticize Darwin, but not the government. In America, you can criticize the government, but not Darwin. As someone who has also grown up to be very skeptical of this theory, I'm extremely aware of the sensitivity with which any criticism of Neo-Darwinian evolution must be handled. I humbly request that the following be considered with unbiased seriousness and hope that despite its lengthiness, someone may find it valuable. Also, I would like to give honor to the serious, profound efforts of Srila Bhaktivinoda Shanta Maharaj and Srila Bhaktivigyan Muni Maharaj under the direction of our Sripad Bhaktimadhava Puri Maharaj, who have been presenting this Darwin under siege for over 10 years throughout India and Nepal. And I hope that this presentation humbly contributes to that same direction. So we can just give a brief overview. Over the past 5 years, institutions affiliated with the U.S. government, such as the National Human Genome Research Institute and the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum, have held conferences and published detailed web pages on the negative sociological impacts of neo-Darwinism, including social Darwinism, eugenics, and scientific racism. In 2023, Harvard University's Kenneth C. Griffin Graduate School of Arts and Sciences published a webpage including deliberations on how Darwin's view of nature was biased towards emphasizing characteristics that were present in his own cultural environment. Since the beginning of the 21st century, the European Parliament, South Korea, and India have all significantly questioned the appropriateness of teaching neo-Darwinism to young students, and have gone so far as to remove his theory from textbooks. In 2021, biologists from Oxford University and the University of Chicago published an infographic showing that the 5 most popular evolution textbooks neglect to include conclusions of 21st century biology that challenge neo-Darwinism, yet are crucial for progress in cancer research. So, you may have heard that India removed the neo-Darwinian theory of evolution from their 9th and 10th grade textbooks in 2022. South Korea did the same in 2012. 6 years before that, in 2006, the European Parliament gathered for a seminar on teaching evolutionary theory in Europe. Is your child being indoctrinated in the classroom? Now, aside from polarizing debates defending either neo-Darwinian evolution or creationism, to which there are alternatives, like the Third Way of Evolution project and Evolution 2.0, so the Third Way of Evolution project, it can be found online, has very nice alternatives, biological alternatives from 21st century biology by scientists doing some wonderful research. It's headed by James Shapiro and Dennis Noble. Here's James Shapiro's book on evolution. It's a must-read for anybody who's really interested in learning about the cognitive aspect of life and how this affects evolution, and how evolution is not just random genetic mutation and natural selection. That's just a fraction and is misleading, actually. There's much more going on, and Dr. Shapiro goes very much in depth about that in his book. This is a second edition that was published a couple years ago. Also, Evolution 2.0 by Perry Marshall, who is a student of James Shapiro. Perry presented at one of our conferences last year, I believe, or the year before that, actually. And so this is Evolution 2.0 is kind of like an undergraduate version of what evolution, a view from the 21st century is. This is more like a graduate study in these topics. Anyhow, so there are alternatives like the third way of evolution and Evolution 2.0. There are also major problems with how evolution is taught to the masses. The 5 best-selling popular evolution books barely mention the cutting-edge discoveries of 21st century biology, which empirically validate that all living entities from single cells to complex organisms are purposeful cognitive agents, and that evolution is a goal-directed process influenced by decision-making, cooperation, and problem-solving, where random genetic mutations play a minor role, and, quote, natural selection eliminates and maybe maintains, but it doesn't create, as recognized by evolutionary biologist Lynn Margulis. Such conclusions are crucial to teach both current and up-and-coming scientists as they affect research areas as important as cancer, where embracing the view that all life is cognitive allows cancer to be treated as a cellular communication problem rather than haphazardly being blasted with radiation. This dissent from NeoDarwinism is justifiable from another perspective. The serious social repercussions of Neo-Darwinism that Dr. Bhaktiniskham Shanta Maharaj has raised during this conference have been acknowledged by serious and esteemed scientific and academic institutions connected with America's government, such as the National Human Genome Research Institute and the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum. Given the alternative name to Darwin's On the Origin of Species, which is also called Preservation of Favored Races in the Struggle for Life, a title which is meant to elaborate on the notion of natural selection, it is not surprising that ideologies detrimental to human flourishing sprouted from this theory. Such ideologies, including social Darwinism, eugenics, and scientific racism, are included. Eugenics, first put forward by Charles Darwin's own cousin, Francis Galton, is the notion that a superior race could be cultivated through selective breeding. Here, those deemed inferior would dilute or tarnish the superiority of the ideal race. So they were to be eliminated. This influenced Adolf Hitler's racial hygiene project, as acknowledged by the Holocaust Museum. And we have links to those articles if you're interested. Significantly, the National Human Genome Research Institute explains, when the Human Genome Project began in 1990, there was a widespread concern that genomics would lead to a new era of eugenics. For more than 3 decades, the National Human Genome Research Institute research program has funded research on all aspects of the social and ethical implications of genomics, including the legacies of eugenics and scientific racism, in the context of new and emerging genetic and genomic technologies. Building on a long tradition of these legacies, the Genome Research Institute is committed to taking proactive steps to provide leadership in the field of genomics and addressing structural racism and anything that would foster eugenics-based ideas, together with efforts of the National Institute of Health, including the UNITE initiative. The Genome Research Institute will continue to combat the legacies of eugenics and scientific racism and their present-day manifestations to develop an inclusive and welcoming genomics community. So to reiterate, these statements are being made by scientific institutions backed by the American government, and not just, low-key institutions. These are the main institutions of genetic research in this country, and they're clearly recognizing the threat of that kind of ideology and the danger of that ideology. So this statement from their fact sheet on eugenics and scientific racism represents the Genome Research Institute's position as of May 2022, up until the present, presumably. Prior to this, considerations of social Darwinism and its corollaries were disregarded as misrepresentations of NeoDarwinian evolutionary theory, as seen in a brief Human Genome Research Institute publication from November 2021, which we can also provide a reference for, and a webpage from the American Museum of Natural History. The Museum of Natural History webpage says, it says, Darwin's theory of evolution by natural selection is entirely focused on an explanation of life's biological diversity. It is a scientific theory meant to explain observations about species. We're missing one slide. Okay. So Darwin's theory of evolution by natural selection is entirely focused on an explanation of life's biological diversity. It is a scientific theory meant to explain observations about species, yet some have used the theory to justify a particular view of human, social, political, or economic conditions. All such ideas have one fundamental flaw. They use a purely scientific theory for a completely unscientific purpose. In doing so, they misrepresent and misappropriate Darwin's original ideas. So just to clarify, the American Museum of Natural History here is saying that Neo-Darwinian evolutionary theory is only a scientific theory meant for scientific purposes, which include explanation of biological diversity and observations about species. So my question is, don't different races of human beings represent biological diversity? Is the social behavior of humans not an observation about species? Unfortunately, this forgetfulness of scientists has existed since 1620, when Francis Bacon asserted, "Of ourselves we say nothing," or in Latin, "De nobis ipsis silimus." However, something shifted in December 2021 when the Human Genome Research Institute held a two-day conference on the meaning of eugenics, historical and present-day discussions of eugenics and scientific realism. The in-depth May 2022 fact sheet uses much more delicate and nuanced language than the more crude November 2021 webpage. So this shows that something happened to trigger them to take these topics more seriously. And they had a conference. There are materials from the conference available online. I can give the resources, the references for. And then we see that a web page and other web materials posted after that conference take scientific realism and eugenics, scientific racism and eugenics much more seriously than before that conference occurred. So, in March 2023, Harvard's Kenneth C. Griffin Graduate School of Arts and Sciences also recognized these ideas through a perspective of Ruth Hubbard, who lived from 1924 to 2016, a respected and accomplished biochemist from Harvard and wife of Nobel laureate George Wald. So, Ruth Hubbard, This is a quote describing her perspective directly from Harvard's website. The title of that page was Deconstructing Darwin, or this is a section on that webpage. And it says, Hubbard began by asking her own questions of one of the foundational works of modern life science, Charles Darwin's On the Origins of Species. As she did, she saw in Darwin's portrayal of the animal world as a kingdom marked by cutthroat competition for scarce resources, not an objective science, but a reflection of the society in which the English naturalist lived. Looked at from a different perspective, Hubbard thought, one could just as easily see the centrality of cooperation in species, survival and flourishing, as the Russian zoologist, geologist, and revolutionary Peter Kropotkin had in his 1902 book, Mutual Aid. Increasingly, she saw supposedly objective scientists reading their social arrangements into nature. So this article on Harvard's website, which was actually titled Visionary, so they were calling Ruth Hubbard a visionary. She was by the way, she was a scientist, she was a biologist, a very rigorous biologist. So, she has authority in commenting on Darwinian evolution and Darwin's approach to biology. And she's clearly saying that it wasn't an unbiased observation that Darwin made. He simply was being influenced by his own social environment. So, as we also mentioned, Ruth Hubbard was the wife of George Wald. He was Nobel laureate in physiology or medicine, also faculty at Harvard for a very long time. And actually, George Wald became friends of the Bhaktivedanta Institute, and specifically of our Gurudev and serving director, Dr. Bhakti Madhava Puri. This is a photo of the two of them in Mumbai around 1980. And George Wald's transformation was directly due to his interactions with the Bhaktivedanta Institute during conferences just like the one that everyone is attending here today. So our Sripad Puri Maharaj had said to George Wald, based on what he had been taught by his guru, Srila Prabhupada, a very rational and sober observation of nature, that rather than thinking life comes from matter, which is what George Wald thought was going on, which is what most scientists think is going on, purely because that's what they're taught in school, rather, why not think that life comes from life, since that's what we observe through every act of reproduction, through every act of mitosis. We see life coming from life. We also see matter coming from life, the growth of nails and hair on a living body for over 100 years. But when the body dies, the hair and nails stop growing. A tree grows from a little tiny seed. So much biomass is generating to a giant California redwood. That matter would not generate if you put the seed in an oven before planting it and killed it. It's because the seed is alive that biomass is generated. So our Gurudev, Bhakti Madhava Puri Maharaj, told these things to George Wald. And George Wald was sober enough to see the truth in them, and it completely reversed his worldview. He even began writing the last major works of his life. They were called The Cosmology of Life and Mind, and it was discussing topics about consciousness being fundamental to the entire universe. And it was very, very wonderful to see that transformation, very inspiring for myself to hear of these kind of pastimes and experiences. So we're also happy to see that his wife, Ruth Hubbard, is also a very sober scientist, a very sober person, and is willing to critically analyze Darwin when not many Americans are or were willing to do such a thing. So, before concluding, I just want to offer two further questions for discussion based on this presentation. The first question is, usually evolution is presented to students as a purposeless and mechanical process guided by random genetic mutation and natural selection. Progress in 21st century biology, however, empirically demonstrates that evolution depends on the purposeful, goal-directed, and cognitive capacities of cells and organisms to make decisions, cooperate with each other, and quickly respond to unexpected problems in their environment. Such conclusions have a profound impact on biomedicine and cancer research. Would you agree that higher education should update its curriculum to include these findings and encourage textbook writers to do the same? Why or why not? Our second question, Conceptually, Darwin's notion of the survival of the fittest, that the prime driver of individual or organism and collective or species survival/success is competition, and that this success produces hierarchies of superior or dominant organisms and species based upon their fitness or capacity to effectively, efficiently, consistently exploit the environment. This has serious social implications. Within the past 2 to 3 years, research institutions affiliated with the U.S. government, such as National Human Genome Research Institute and the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum, have published public web pages about the historic, autocratic, racist, fascist, and genocidal byproducts of people who take Darwin's theory very seriously and act upon it. Isn't this reason to conclude that a strictly competition-based biological theoretical framework is antagonistic to the survival and flourishing of human diversity and freedom? Eminent biologists like the late Lynn Margulis, who proposed symbiogenesis as an important evolutionary mechanism, have recognized the necessity of cooperation as a driver of evolution. Is this reasonable? Why or why not? So the topics discussed in this talk are of the utmost importance to the progress of science and society, which the Princeton Bhaktivedanta Institute is very much concerned with. This is why conferences such as this current conference and our upcoming conference on Sunday, December 8th, which will be an online conference, our Science and Scientists 2024 conference. That's why they're organized to discuss these very important topics in the guidance in the guidance of people who are really qualified to present these things, such as Dr. B. Madhavapuri, Dr. B. Nishkamshanta, Dr. B. Vigyan Muni, Sumangala Devi Dasi, Dr. Sumangala Devi Dasi, etc. So in conclusion, we find some sage words relevant to the kind of mentality required to accommodate the current paradigm shift offered by a futurist named Alvin Toffler from back in 1970. He said, "The illiterate of the 21st century will not be those who cannot read and write, but those who cannot learn, unlearn, and relearn." So, if you find anything that I said useful or thought-provoking, then I humbly request you to scan the QR code here and check out the information for our upcoming conference, Science and Scientists 24, which will be about systems biology and overcoming reductionism. If you're interested in registering for that online conference, please feel free to reach out. All contact information is on the website associated with the link you see here. Thank you very much for your time and consideration. I want to also thank the assembled Vaishnavas, Panchakalpa Tribhyascha, Kripasindu Bhyevacha, Patitanam Pavanebhyo, Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namah, and giving our spiritual masters reverence and gratitude for their instruction, despite our disqualifications. Om Gyanatimidan Hasya Gyananjana Shalakaya Chakshar Un Militam Yena Tasmai Shri Guruve Namah. Namaste.